On our 6th anniversary, my husband did not abandon me quietly. He betrayed me like a performance before our families, believing wealth dictated who deserved love. What he did not know was that the rich woman did not enter his life to save him, but to watch him expose his true colors. At our divorce meeting, when everyone assumed I would lose everything, the man who left me finally understood that some mistakes cannot be signed away. My name is Ivy Reynolds, and I am 34 years old. I hold the position of Director of Operational Strategy at Briarstone Civic Systems. It is a highly respected firm, albeit one largely unknown to the general public, embedded deeply within the urban planning circles of Philadelphia. We deal in infrastructure data, predictive modeling for utility loads, and city budget allocations. My role is not one that invites glamour, public applause, or easy conversations at dinner parties. It requires a relentless commitment to discipline, a mind geared toward mitigating catastrophic risks, and an unyielding focus on the structural integrity of metropolitan projects. I built my career block by block over the last 12 years, entirely devoid of flashy maneuvers, corporate backstabbing, or pretentious networking. I am the kind of woman who finds profound comfort in predictability, spreadsheets, and hard facts. I leave the theatrical aspects of corporate life to those who crave the spotlight and need constant validation. Yet, in a cruel and drawn-out twist of irony, my very stability, my quiet and unshakable foundation, became the precise platform upon which my husband, Caleb Whitmore, stood to shine before the rest of the world. Caleb was a former commercial real estate broker, though you would never guess the former part based on how he carried himself on a daily basis. When the market shifted a few years ago, he smoothly transitioned into what he vaguely called independent consulting, a title that afforded him maximum flexibility and minimal accountability. He possessed an inherent fluency in the language of charm. He was an exceptionally smooth talker, perpetually sociable, and armed with a magnetic charisma that effortlessly drew people into his orbit. He knew exactly how to work a crowded room, how to laugh at the right moments, and how to subtly assert his presence without ever appearing desperate or overbearing. Above all, Caleb had mastered the art of social perception. He flawlessly convinced our friends, our families, and my own colleagues that he was the formidable, protective, and brilliant husband standing steadfastly behind a successful corporate woman. He wore his public support for me like a bespoke tailored suit, designed specifically to make him look progressive, confident, and utterly secure in his masculinity. To the outside world, and particularly in the eager eyes of our respective families, we were the archetypal model couple. We resided in a breathtaking, meticulously curated colonial home on the Main Line, a sprawling property that stood as a physical testament to our dual incomes and supposedly shared sophisticated tastes. Our lives appeared seamlessly organized from the outside looking in. We maintained crystal-clear holiday schedules, ensuring equal time was spent with his parents in Connecticut and mine in upstate New York, never once missing a Thanksgiving dinner or a traditional Christmas brunch. Our anniversary photos, posted annually without fail, were always flawless, capturing moments of curated marital bliss against the backdrop of expensive five-star restaurants or scenic international getaways. Furthermore, we had no children. In the affluent, hyper-competitive circles we navigated daily, this absence of offspring was often viewed not as a lack of family, but as a supreme luxury. People openly assumed we breathed easier than other couples, unburdened by the chaotic demands of parenting, private school tuitions, and childcare schedules. They believed we were free to channel 100% of our energy into our lucrative careers, our beautiful home, and each other. We were the absolute portrait of a modern, successful partnership, a picture so completely convincing that even I refused to look closely at the rough brushstrokes hidden in the corners. For 6 years of marriage, I sincerely believed Caleb loved me because of the very qualities I valued most in myself. I thought he deeply admired my calmness under pressure, my unwavering reliability, and my quiet strength. I assumed he saw me as a true equal partner, an emotional anchor he could depend on. someone robust enough to walk beside him through any conceivable phase of life. When his real estate deals fell through and his commissions dipped to zero for months at a time, I was the one who balanced the household budget, paid the mortgage, and assured him we were perfectly fine. I thought my composure was the safe sanctuary he returned to when the world outside grew too demanding or chaotic. However, looking back now with the cold, unforgiving clarity that only deep betrayal provides, I am beginning to understand a deeply unsettling truth. Caleb did not love my calmness. He did not love my strength or my stoic nature. What he truly loved, what he was absolutely infatuated with, was the profound sense of safety that my financial success afforded him. I was never his sanctuary. I was his fully funded insurance policy. My steady, reliable climb up the corporate ladder at Briarstone allowed him the ultimate luxury of taking risks, of appearing wildly successful without bearing the crushing weight of actual financial responsibility. The small details, the insidious little red flags, had been manifesting themselves for a very long time before the actual breaking point occurred. I just chose to willfully categorize them under the label of supportive spousal interest. Caleb harbored a peculiar, almost clinical obsession with my financial trajectory. He paid extraordinary attention to the vesting schedule of my company equity, tracking the dates on our shared calendar. Whenever the fourth quarter approached, his inquiries about my performance metrics and the likelihood of my year-end bonus were relentless, cleverly disguised as supportive curiosity. He would casually ask over morning coffee about the exact dollar figures, the bonus multipliers, and the specific payout dates. More tellingly, he cared intensely about the visibility of my name within the industry. He would eagerly scrutinize internal company reports I brought home, noting exactly where my name was mentioned, which powerful board members I presented to, and how much influence I was wielding over the massive city contracts. He wanted to know precisely how much corporate power I held, not because he was proud of my towering intellect, but because my power was a highly valuable currency he fully intended to spend. This parasitic dynamic became glaringly obvious during our frequent social engagements. Whenever I received an invitation to exclusive business events, charity galas, or high-level networking dinners in the city, Caleb always insisted on accompanying me. To the untrained eye, he was the ultimate supportive spouse, beaming with pride by my side, fetching me drinks and holding my coat. But beneath the polished veneer of the loving husband, an entirely different, calculating agenda was playing out. He treated every prestigious invitation I earned as a shared victory, a golden door that had been opened specifically for his benefit. He would smoothly interject himself into my private conversations with key stakeholders, influential city planners, and wealthy venture capitalists. He would casually drop my impressive title into discussions, using my hard-earned credibility as a sturdy bridge to introduce his own vague business consulting ideas or to simply rub elbows with individuals who possessed significant capital. He was diligently, quietly learning how to confidently stride into affluent, powerful rooms without ever having to forge the keys himself. He was studying the intricate architecture of my success, so he could perfectly replicate the social benefits without putting in a single hour of the grueling labor. I recall one specific evening at a major civic development fundraiser just last year. I had spent 6 grueling weeks pulling 70-hour shifts to finalize the complex data models that made the entire event possible. I was physically and mentally exhausted, standing quietly in the corner nursing a single glass of sparkling water. Caleb, meanwhile, was holding court near the center open bar, engaged in deep, animated conversation with the managing director of a massive private equity firm. I watched from afar as Caleb laughed loudly, patted the older man on the shoulder, and pointed affectionately in my direction. I knew exactly what he was saying without hearing a single word. He was using my exhaustion, my undeniable hard work, as a charming talking point to elevate his own social status. He was expertly selling them the narrative of the unstoppable power couple, positioning himself as the indispensable, visionary partner while I played the role of the diligent, silent engine making it all run. It is a truly terrifying realization to comprehend, that you have been entirely misread and strategically utilized by the person you sleep next to every single night. I honestly thought we were building a beautiful life together, laying down the foundation brick by mutual brick. I believed every deposit into our joint checking account, every late night spent reviewing legal contracts, every sacrifice made for the sake of our shared future was a beautiful testament to our enduring partnership. But Caleb viewed our marriage through a radically different, utterly transactional lens. He viewed our union as a subsidized incubator for his own grand ambitions. He needed a woman who was too busy working, too dedicated to her career, to notice that he was quietly assessing her market value, waiting patiently for the optimal moment to cash out his shares. An outsider looking at our pristine life on the main line would see an impregnable fortress of happiness. They would see the perfectly manicured green lawn, the two expensive German cars parked in the wide driveway, and the two smiling, well-dressed professionals who seemingly had everything figured out. They would see a modern marriage that looked exactly like a solid, beautifully constructed house built to weather any storm, but a house is only as strong as what lies hidden beneath it. And deep down, where no one else could possibly see, the foundation of our perfect life was not made of poured concrete or reinforced steel. It was made of shifting sand. And for years, my husband had been quietly, methodically, pulling that sand out, handful by handful, blindly preparing for the inevitable day the entire structure would cave in on top of us. The shift in our lives did not begin with a slammed door or a raised voice. It began with an emergency boardroom meeting on a Tuesday morning at Briarstone Civic Systems. The atmosphere in the executive suite was heavy, completely devoid of the usual crisp corporate efficiency. An internal review had been triggered regarding severe discrepancies in the bidding data for a massive municipal infrastructure project we had secured late last year. I was not the direct target of the investigation. My operational strategies were entirely sound, and my department possessed a flawless record. However, in the high-stakes realm of predictive urban modeling and municipal budgets, mere proximity to a potential data leak is just as dangerous as being the actual source of the breach. I was immediately thrust into a grueling, closed-door audit process. The legal team handed me a thick stack of non-disclosure agreements that practically bound my tongue in iron. I signed every single page without hesitation, fully knowing the strict corporate protocol, but the immediate fallout from this administrative nightmare was severe. All executive bonuses for the fiscal year were indefinitely suspended pending the investigation results. My predictable daily schedule rapidly dissolved into an erratic, exhausting mess of early morning legal depositions and late-night damage control sessions with the board of directors. I was explicitly instructed by the general counsel to be exceedingly cautious with every piece of communication, both internal and external. Bringing this heavy burden of news home to Caleb felt akin to carrying a live explosive into our serene living room. Because of the strict confidentiality clauses I had just signed, I could not give him the intricate specifics of the crisis. I could only tell him that the next few months would be exceptionally difficult, that the generous year-end monetary bonus we usually relied heavily upon was frozen, and that my professional footing was temporarily unstable. I sat on our expensive leather sofa, exhausted to my very bones, and watched his face carefully as I delivered the highly sanitized version of the truth. He did not explode in anger. He did not pace the room in frustration or shout about the unfairness of the situation. Instead, his reaction was a chilling masterclass in a calculated, self-serving pivot. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed in what perfectly mimicked deep marital concern, but his ensuing questions immediately betrayed the true underlying nature of his anxiety. He did not ask how I was holding up under the immense, crushing pressure of the legal audit. He did not offer a comforting hand or suggest we take a quiet weekend trip to decompress from the stress. His inquiries were sharp, rapid, and entirely focused on the structural integrity of my financial compensation package. He wanted to know the exact probability of Briarstone losing its most lucrative municipal clients. He pressed me relentlessly on whether the board of directors might actively look for a scapegoat, and if my executive position was genuinely secure. The most chilling question arrived when he asked specifically about my unlisted equity shares. He wanted to know if a public scandal would drastically devalue the company's stock before my shares fully vested next spring. I sat there, listening to the man I married interrogate me, and a profound, cold realization washed over my skin. He was not assessing the emotional toll this ordeal would take on his wife. He was actively, ruthlessly auditing his primary financial asset. He was speaking to me with the exact, detached tone an aggressive investor utilizes when trying to determine if it is the optimal time to cut major losses and liquidate a failing portfolio. Over the following several weeks, the atmosphere inside our beautiful home underwent a subtle, agonizing transformation. Caleb did not become overtly cruel or abusive. Cruelty would have required a level of passionate emotional investment that he was rapidly withdrawing from our relationship. Instead, he became impeccably, devastatingly polite. He performed the basic duties of a supportive partner like a seasoned actor flawlessly going through the motions of a script he no longer believed in. He would bring me a cup of black coffee in the early morning, politely asking how my sleep was, but his eyes would already be darting anxiously to the glowing screen of his mobile phone. The warm physical intimacy that once easily bridged our stressful days evaporated entirely, replaced by a careful, deliberate physical distance. If my hand accidentally brushed against his while standing in the kitchen, he would smoothly step away under the guise of checking the refrigerator or turning off the stove. We continued to share a bed, but the vast space between us felt like a carefully negotiated, freezing, demilitarized zone. I was living with a man who was emotionally packing up his belongings, merely waiting out the remainder of a lease. Simultaneously, while he was quietly pulling away from me within the walls of our home, he was actively expanding his social presence elsewhere. Caleb suddenly experienced a massive influx of late-evening client meetings. When I casually asked for details over dinner, his answers were always frustratingly vague, smoothly brushing them off as preliminary consultations for his independent advisory business. I began to notice he was dressing significantly differently for these nebulous nocturnal appointments. The casual, relaxed blazers he usually wore were entirely replaced by sharper, perfectly tailored suits that looked brand new. He purchased a new, undeniably expensive cologne, a heavy, rich scent that was much darker and far more sophisticated than anything he had ever worn during our marriage. He smelled precisely like a man who was actively trying to impress someone who expected the absolute best that money could buy. More alarmingly, he began showing a sudden, intense interest in attending high society galas, exclusive charity dinners, and private art gallery openings. These were exactly the kinds of affluent places where my corporate title used to serve as his golden ticket for entry. Now, he was navigating those shark-infested waters completely alone, or at the very least, without my presence beside him. The physical exhaustion from the ongoing Briarstone audit was settling deep into my bones, but the constant stress also sharply heightened my instincts. One Friday night, I came down to the kitchen to get a glass of cold water well past midnight. The house was dead silent. Caleb was sitting at the heavy oak dining table, completely bathed in the pale blue light emanating from his laptop screen. He was so deeply absorbed in whatever document he was reading that he did not hear my bare footsteps walking across the hardwood floor. I paused a few feet behind his chair, holding my breath. On his screen was not a commercial real estate listing or a standard consulting contract. It was a highly detailed profile page and a comprehensive guest list for an upcoming, highly exclusive financial summit hosted by a prominent private equity fund. It was a specific fund I was actually familiar with, having attended one of their regional seminars 3 years ago when Briarstone was aggressively expanding its regional reach. I scanned the bright screen very quickly before he had the chance to realize I was there and minimize the window. There was one specific name highlighted boldly at the very top of the executive event dossier: Adrienne Vale. That name struck a resonant chord in my memory almost immediately. Adrienne Vale was not just a wealthy woman. She possessed the kind of generational, quiet money that could effortlessly move entire financial markets without ever making the front page of the daily business journals. She was a fiercely intelligent widow who had decisively taken the helm of her late husband's massive empire, Vale Ledger Capital. She was notoriously private, completely avoiding the flashy, superficial socialite circles of the city, but her influence within the private infrastructure investment sector of the Northeast was considered absolute and terrifying. People did not simply network with Adrienne Vale, they sought an exclusive audience with her. She was a verified kingmaker operating in the exact industry Caleb had been desperately trying to penetrate for years using my hard-earned credentials. Caleb finally sensed my quiet presence behind him and snapped the laptop shut with a sharp, echoing click. He immediately offered me a tight, entirely artificial smile, smoothly claiming he was just doing some late-night industry research for a potential new client. I nodded slowly, pouring my glass of water, making absolutely sure to keep my facial expression perfectly blank and unreadable. I did not ask him why he was extensively researching a woman whose personal net worth likely rivaled the gross domestic product of a small island nation. I did not ask him why his late-night industry research required a fresh, expensive haircut and a newly tailored designer suit. I simply turned around and walked back up the wooden stairs, my heart pounding a slow, incredibly heavy rhythm against my ribs. Laying perfectly still in the dark bedroom, staring blankly up at the ceiling, the disparate pieces of the puzzle locked together with a terrifying, undeniable clarity, the sudden, polite emotional distance, the unyielding, clinical questions regarding my financial stability and corporate equity, the expensive new cologne lingering in the hallway, the late-night dossier reading of a billionaire widow. I was currently navigating the most treacherous professional crisis of my entire adult life, facing down ruthless corporate lawyers and working grueling hours just to protect my career reputation. But the genuine, icy terror I felt in that exact moment had absolutely nothing to do with the internal audit at Briarstone Civic Systems. The cold chill slowly creeping down my spine was the profound, utterly isolating realization that my husband was not standing faithfully by my side preparing to weather a storm together. He was quietly packing his bags and actively searching for a much wealthier port to dock his ship. I was not afraid of losing my executive job or my professional standing. I was afraid because I was standing perfectly still in the dark, watching the man I deeply loved coldly calculate my depreciating value, quietly preparing to auction his loyalty to the absolute highest bidder. I am not the type of woman who waits until midnight to panic and frantically scroll through her husband's text messages while he sleeps. My entire career is built on identifying systemic anomalies, finding the invisible fractures in massive data sets before the structural bridge collapses. My instincts are not driven by frantic emotion. They are coldly analytical. Betrayal. I was quickly learning, rarely leaves a smudge of bright red lipstick on a shirt collar in the modern corporate age. It leaves a digital footprint. It leaves a meticulous trail of misaligned timestamps, geographical inconsistencies, and minute shifts in consumer spending habits. I started my quiet investigation where I was always most comfortable. I started with the numbers. Reviewing our joint credit card statements used to be a mundane, 10-minute monthly chore I performed over Sunday morning black tea. Now, it transformed into a rigorous forensic audit. I noticed the glaring discrepancies almost immediately upon logging into the banking portal. They were small enough to escape casual observation, but entirely obvious to someone trained to spot pattern deviations. There was a charge for an exorbitant valet parking fee of $85 in Lower Manhattan on a Tuesday afternoon. There was another receipt for $300 at a private tasting room inside an exclusive boutique hotel in the city a few days later. The most insulting entry, however, was a bill for nearly $400 at a very prestigious French restaurant in the meatpacking district. That specific charge was time-stamped on the exact same Thursday evening Caleb had sworn to me he was entertaining a mid-level logistics client out in King of Prussia. King of Prussia is a solid 2-hour drive from Manhattan in heavy rush-hour traffic. The physical math simply did not align with his spoken narrative. He was spending our shared resources to cultivate a life located hundreds of miles away from the one we had built. The concrete, undeniable proof arrived not through my exhaustive data digging, but through his sheer, arrogant carelessness. It was a late Thursday night, Caleb was in the master bathroom taking a remarkably long shower. He had left his mobile phone sitting face up on the edge of the cold marble vanity. I was standing by the double sink, brushing my teeth, paying absolutely no attention to his device. Suddenly, the glass screen illuminated the dark, steam-filled room. A single notification banner appeared across the top. It did not have a saved contact name attached to it, just an unknown area code originating from New York. The preview text was brief, sharp, and entirely devoid of any cheap romantic affection. The message read exactly like a strategic directive. It said, "Do not underestimate your wife. She is smarter than you think." My heart did not shatter into a million pieces. It simply turned to solid ice. Before the phone screen could fade back to black, the heavy shower water shut off abruptly. Caleb stepped out of the glass enclosure, a white towel hastily wrapped around his waist, and his eyes instantly darted toward the glowing phone on the counter. The sheer, unadulterated panic that violently flashed across his wet face was the most honest emotion I had witnessed from him in over 6 months. He lunged forward clumsily, snatching the expensive device with dripping hands, his thumbs moving frantically across the glass to delete the entire message thread before I could supposedly process what I had just seen. He offered me a breathless, entirely unconvincing, and frankly insulting excuse about a persistent spam message from an aggressive corporate recruiter who would not leave him alone. I did not argue. I simply nodded my head, spit my mint toothpaste into the porcelain sink, and walked out of the bathroom without saying a single word. His panicked, desperate, and sloppy reaction told me everything I needed to know. The sender of that message was not a foolish, infatuated mistress sending late-night inappropriate photographs. This was a highly calculated player. This was a woman operating on a strategic, intellectual level, someone who viewed me not as a petty romantic rival to be jealous of, but as a genuine, formidable threat to whatever acquisition she was currently planning. The very next morning, I did not call my mother in tears. I did not call a sympathetic best friend to vent my frustrations over a glass of wine. I picked up my office phone and called Naomi Pike. Naomi was a highly specialized matrimonial attorney based in a discreet, unlisted office suite overlooking Rittenhouse Square. She was notoriously quiet in polite social circles, but possessed a terrifying reputation for being absolutely ruthless inside a courtroom. I did not hire her to draft immediate divorce papers that Friday morning. I hired her to meticulously map the incoming battlefield. I needed to understand exactly what assets I had to fiercely protect if the ground beneath my feet completely gave way. Sitting in her minimalist, slate-gray office, surrounded by walls of heavy legal texts, I calmly laid out the financial credit card discrepancies, the geographical lies, and the chilling nature of the text message I had witnessed. Naomi listened to my entire presentation without a single flicker of judgment or false pity. When I finished speaking, she folded her manicured hands neatly on her heavy mahogany desk and offered a profound piece of advice that would ultimately define my entire survival strategy. She instructed me never to confront a man when you only possess half of the puzzle pieces. People who abandon their long-term marriages for the pursuit of extreme financial gain do not merely pack a quick suitcase in a sudden fit of emotional passion. They carefully and methodically engineer an exit strategy. They move liquid assets. They secure new independent revenue streams. And they quietly build a robust financial lifeboat long before they ever publicly announce that the marital ship is sinking. Naomi warned me that if I tipped my hand too early, if I confronted him with tears and accusations, he would simply hide his tracks far better and accelerate his timeline before I could build a proper defense. Taking Naomi's cold legal advice completely to heart, I returned home and dug much deeper into the public state business registries, applying the exact same rigorous search algorithms I normally utilized for auditing massive municipal contracts. It took me 3 exhaustive, sleepless nights to finally find the hidden thread. Caleb had quietly incorporated a new limited liability company 4 weeks prior. It was registered under the highly pretentious name Whitmore Mercer Advisory. He had purposefully used a generic corporate post office box located in a strip mall as the primary business mailing address. More deviously, he had listed his younger, easily manipulated cousin as the nominal registered agent in an obvious, amateurish attempt to keep his own name off the top line of the public incorporation documents. Staring at the official state documents printed perfectly on my home office desk, the final lingering illusion of my marriage completely evaporated into thin air. The core issue at hand was no longer a simple, tragic matter of suburban infidelity. Caleb was not just having a wealthy, exciting affair in the city. He was systematically constructing a brand new, fully funded corporate existence behind my back. He was actively building a legal financial vehicle designed specifically to catch whatever wealth he was currently planning to secure. Whether that intended funding was coming directly from a billionaire widow's private equity fund, or whether it was assets he fully intended to aggressively extract from my own accounts on his way out the door, the ultimate goal was clear. He was viewing our 6 years of marriage not as a partnership, but as a depreciating asset he desperately needed to liquidate for maximum personal profit. I carefully gathered the freshly printed state documents, the highlighted credit card statements, and the incredibly detailed chronological timeline I had constructed. I slid all the damning evidence into a thick, secure manila folder. I placed the heavy folder at the very bottom of my locked metal filing cabinet, burying it beneath years of old tax returns. I did not shed a single tear as I turned the tiny silver key. I did not harbor any burning desire to scream loudly, to throw his expensive new cologne bottles against the tiled bathroom wall, or to stage a dramatic, tearful confrontation in the center of our beautifully decorated living room. Doing any of those things would only give him the perfect opportunity to paint me as the hysterical, unstable, and irrational wife. It would play perfectly into whatever false, victimized narrative he was currently spinning for his wealthy new audience in Manhattan. Instead of exploding, I made a very clear, highly conscious, and incredibly difficult decision. I chose absolute, suffocating, weaponized silence. I would continue to drink the morning coffee he politely poured for me. I would continue to casually ask about his fictitious consulting meetings over dinner. I would stand perfectly still in the center of the room and simply watch him operate. I wanted to see exactly how far my husband was genuinely willing to go. I wanted to see how deeply he would eagerly dig his own grave, all while he arrogantly and foolishly believed that no one in the world was watching him work in the dark. Our 6th wedding anniversary dinner was meticulously orchestrated and held in the private dining room of a legendary wood-paneled restaurant right in the beating heart of Center City. It was a Tuesday evening, a night typically reserved for quiet corporate dinners. But Caleb had insisted on celebrating the exact calendar date of our union. The guest list included exactly 14 people. My parents had driven 4 long hours down from upstate New York, arriving tired but incredibly happy to celebrate their only daughter. Caleb brought his mother and father, along with 2 of his most judgmental aunts and a highly successful uncle he constantly, desperately tried to impress with his vague business jargon. It was an environment strategically designed by him to be absolutely secure. It was insulated by shared bloodlines, bottles of champagne that cost $300 each, and the thick, velvet curtains of high society politeness. For the first 2 hours of the evening, Caleb delivered an absolutely flawless, Oscar-worthy performance. If I had not already uncovered the hidden limited liability company and the clandestine hotel charges in Manhattan, I might have actually believed the profound love radiating from his smile. He pulled out chairs for the older women, he ordered the vintage wine with practiced confidence, and he regaled the entire table with charming, incredibly hollow anecdotes about our supposed domestic bliss on the main line. He spoke highly of my dedication to my career, painting himself as the deeply supportive bedrock of our household. I sat quietly, picking at my expensive roasted duck, watching him operate with a growing, icy sense of clinical detachment. His behavior was entirely too perfect, his smiles too sharply timed, his eye contact too deliberate. I knew right then, with absolute certainty, that he had meticulously built a stage for a specific purpose. He was not hosting a warm family celebration. He was hosting a carefully directed premiere of his new life, and I was merely the unsuspecting co-star about to be written out of the script. The atmospheric shift occurred precisely when the white-coated waiters silently cleared the heavy porcelain main plates and brought out the delicate, dark chocolate truffles for dessert. The room was filled with the low hum of relaxed, wine-soaked conversation. Caleb suddenly stood up from his heavy mahogany chair. He picked up his crystal champagne flute, tapping his heavy silver spoon against the delicate glass to command the immediate attention of the entire room. The lively conversations halted instantly. My mother leaned forward across the white linen tablecloth with a soft, warmly expectant smile, likely anticipating a grand romantic declaration of his undying love. His father puffed out his chest and raised his own glass in preemptive, proud celebration of his successful son. Caleb looked slowly around the long table, letting the heavy silence stretch for a highly calculated, agonizing 5 seconds. He made sure to make fleeting eye contact with every single person in the room. Then, instead of raising his glass toward me in a traditional toast, he slowly lowered the crystal flute to his waist. He turned his body slightly, looking directly into my eyes, ensuring he had the completely undivided attention of our combined families. His face was entirely devoid of warmth. "I have gathered you all here tonight because I value absolute honesty above all else," he began, his voice projecting smoothly and confidently across the quiet room. "And the brutal, honest truth is that I can no longer continue this marriage." The entire room completely froze. The silence was so absolute, so incredibly sudden and violently sharp, that I could clearly hear the faint, distant clinking of silverware from the main dining floor outside our heavy oak doors. My mother's gentle smile vanished instantly, violently replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. She gripped her white cloth napkin so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. Caleb did not flinch at the collective shock. He did not look away from me. He was visibly reveling in the sudden, dramatic shift in power. "Ivy and I have had a very good run over the last 6 years," he continued, using the condescending, measured, and entirely sanitized tone of a corporate executive delivering bad quarterly financial news to a room of disgruntled shareholders. "But a successful marriage requires a solid foundation of mutual growth and, above all else, reliable stability. Over the past few months, it has become abundantly clear to me that Ivy can no longer provide that necessary stability. Her professional future has become dark, volatile, and deeply uncertain. The path forward for her is entirely blurred by complications she refuses to manage properly. I have spent years happily supporting her, willingly sacrificing my own professional trajectory to be the solid man standing behind her success. But I cannot, and I absolutely will not, sacrifice the rest of my promising life just to willingly stay on a rapidly sinking ship." A sharp collective gasp echoed loudly from my side of the long table. My father's weathered face flushed a deep, highly dangerous shade of crimson, and his large, calloused hands gripped the thick edge of the heavy wooden table as if he was physically restraining himself from lunging across the floral centerpiece to strangle his son-in-law. Caleb's relatives, however, reacted exactly as his calculated script likely anticipated. His mother looked down at her lap immediately, suddenly finding her own hands intensely interesting, completely avoiding my gaze. His wealthy uncle shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearing his throat quietly. They were already circling the wagons, preparing their minds to protect their own bloodline, readily accepting the false narrative that I was a failing, unstable burden holding their brilliant boy back from his true potential. Then, Caleb delivered the final, fatal blow. It was a sentence he had undoubtedly practiced in front of his bathroom mirror for weeks, designed to inflict maximum public humiliation. "I have made the difficult decision to actively choose my own future," he announced loudly, his chest puffed out with a sickening sense of arrogant righteousness. "I have recently met a remarkable woman who truly understands the massive scope of my ambitions. She possesses the substantial financial resources, the necessary vision, and the elite pedigree to match my drive. She perfectly fits the high-level, expansive future I have always been destined for. It is a future I can simply no longer afford to delay by dragging dead weight behind me." The absolute, staggering audacity of his public statement hung heavily in the suffocating, tense air of the private room. He was publicly auctioning my dignity, attempting to utterly humiliate me in front of the very people who loved me most, simply to legally and morally justify his own extreme greed. He wanted me to break down completely. He desperately needed me to scream loudly, to cry uncontrollably, to throw my expensive wine glass directly at his handsome, smug face. He needed me to act like the crazy, emotionally unstable, and ruined woman he was falsely claiming I had become. If I broke down, his wealthy new audience in Manhattan, and his own judgmental family, would view him as a tragic, heroic refugee fleeing a highly toxic, collapsing environment. I refused to give him a single drop of the satisfaction he craved. I slowly picked up my linen napkin, folded it meticulously into a perfect, neat square, and placed it gently on the table right next to my untouched chocolate dessert. I did not shake. I did not rush my movements. I looked calmly around the completely frozen room, letting my cold gaze linger briefly on his cowardly parents and his silent uncle, before finally locking my eyes completely with the man I had married 6 years ago. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I spoke in a tone that was completely devoid of anger, a voice almost gentle in its absolute, chilling, and terrifying certainty. If you truly had to weigh my worth on a financial price chart, Caleb, then leaving is indeed the most logical business decision you could possibly make. My profound, unshakable calmness caught him entirely off guard. The smug, highly rehearsed, triumphant sneer on his face faltered visibly for a fraction of a second. He physically blinked hard, clearly thrown entirely off his carefully memorized script. He had prepared his entire defense against a hysterical, weeping wife. He had absolutely no defense against a woman who simply agreed with his brutal, highly transactional assessment of their relationship. However, his supreme, ingrained narcissism quickly rushed in to rescue him. He straightened the lapels of his tailored jacket, his confident smirk slowly returning as he entirely misinterpreted my quiet, stoic composure for utter defeat. He genuinely, foolishly believed my total lack of tears was a white flag of complete surrender. He thought he had won the war with a single speech. I did not wait for any further rebuttal from him, nor did I wait for my father to finally explode. I stood up smoothly, pushing my heavy chair back, and picked up my small leather clutch from the table. I placed a hand gently on my father's tense, shaking shoulder, squeezing it once to silently signal him to stand down and remain seated. I did not say another single word to anyone at the table. I simply turned my back on the entire pathetic spectacle and walked confidently out of the private dining room, the sharp heels of my shoes clicking methodically and rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor, echoing loudly in the dead silence I left behind. When I pushed through the heavy brass front doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the biting, freezing cold air of the center city night, my vision was perfectly clear and my breathing was entirely steady. I did not shed a single tear on the dark pavement. I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers completely steady in the winter wind. I opened my encrypted message thread with Naomi Pike and typed exactly 2 sentences. Prepare the files. He just turned himself into evidence. Exactly 48 hours after his highly theatrical performance at the anniversary restaurant, Caleb officially vacated our home on the main line. He did not leave in a chaotic rush of hastily packed cardboard boxes and slammed doors. He moved with the practiced, seamless efficiency of a man stepping onto a waiting private jet. He relocated to a high-end serviced apartment located in a sleek glass tower in Manhattan, instantly adopting the posture and daily routines of a man who had finally ascended to the elite social stratum he always genuinely believed he deserved. His digital footprint immediately transformed into a carefully curated exhibition of his newly elevated status. He posted photographs on his social media accounts that were absolute masterclasses in calculated ambiguity. There were no clear pictures of Adrian Vale's face anywhere on his timeline. Instead, there were subtle, highly expensive hints deliberately designed to provoke envy and speculation. He posted an image of 2 crystal tumblers filled with rare scotch, resting on a heavy mahogany table, in a dimly lit, private tasting lounge. He shared a perfectly framed shot, showing the unmistakable edge of a bespoke leather handbag casually resting next to a highly sought-after reservation plate at a Michelin-starred restaurant. He uploaded short videos of the breathtaking view from a high-rise penthouse balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline at midnight. This psychological warfare was highly effective. I watched silently as several of his extended relatives, the exact same individuals who had sat frozen at our dinner table, began leaving warmly supportive comments on his posts. Their loyalties were visibly and predictably swaying toward the powerful gravitational pull of his newly projected wealth, eagerly validating his narrative that he had moved on to bigger and better things. While Caleb was busy painting his digital masterpiece of an affluent, sophisticated bachelor life, Naomi Pike was meticulously dissecting our shared financial history inside her slate-gray office. She uncovered exactly how he had managed to quietly finance his initial, expensive leap into the city. He had not made a single massive wire transfer that would have immediately triggered a bank fraud alert or sent a panic notification directly to my mobile phone. Instead, over the past 4 months, he had executed a relentless, disciplined series of micro-withdrawals from our joint savings and household operating accounts. He pulled out $300 here, $500 there, always meticulously burying the transactions under the vague, plausible categorization of cash expenses for his independent consulting business. Examined individually, the amounts were entirely unremarkable and easy to ignore. Cumulatively, however, they amounted to roughly $40,000. It was a methodical, premeditated bleeding of our shared assets, executed with the cold, absolute precision of a surgeon preparing to sever a limb. The legal chessboard was rapidly becoming clearer, but a crucial missing piece arrived 2 days later from an entirely unexpected source. I was having a quick, bleak morning coffee with Tessa Baird, one of my most trusted and observant senior colleagues at Briarstone Civic Systems. Tessa is a woman who misses absolutely nothing in a crowded room. She leaned across the small cafe table, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, asking how I was handling the sudden, public separation. Before I could offer my standard, sanitized corporate response, she brought up a major charity fundraiser for regional infrastructure development she had attended several weeks prior. It was an exclusive, high-ticket event where Briarstone had purchased a corporate table, but Caleb had absolutely no legitimate professional justification for being in that room. Tessa described watching him navigate the gala from afar. He completely ignored the mid-level executives and the standard, accessible networking circles near the open bars. Instead, she watched him deliberately and aggressively maneuver his way through the dense crowd to strategically corner Adrian Vale near the private outdoor terrace. Tessa noted that his approach was not casual or accidental. It was the highly targeted, aggressive strike of a man executing a deeply rehearsed pitch. The sheer, staggering audacity of his networking attempt was still settling in my tired mind when the true, tectonic disruption to my entire legal strategy occurred. It did not come from Naomi, and it certainly did not come from Caleb's aggressive new attorney. It came directly from the apex predator herself. I received a beautifully embossed, heavy cardstock envelope delivered by a private, uniformed courier directly to my office desk. Inside the envelope was a single, elegantly printed invitation to join Adrian Vale for a private afternoon tea at an exclusive, unlisted members club on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The handwritten note at the bottom explicitly stated there should be no legal representation present, no hidden recording devices, and absolutely no tedious social theater. It was a direct summons from a woman who operated entirely outside the standard, predictable rules of bitter marital combat. I arrived at the heavily guarded club exactly on time. The interior was a hushed, intimidating sanctuary of dark velvet drapery, antique brass fixtures, and the quiet, insulated murmur of immense, generational wealth. Adrian was seated gracefully in a secluded corner booth, completely shielded from the rest of the opulent room by high, tufted leather walls. When I sat down across from her, the very first thing I realized was that she utterly defied the tired, cinematic cliché of the glamorous, vapid homewrecker. She was sharply dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, her demeanor incredibly calm, her gaze piercing and entirely analytical. She poured the hot tea herself, her movements precise, deliberate, and entirely unhurried. She did not offer a false, saccharine apology, nor did she attempt to justify her sudden presence in my husband's life. Instead, she looked directly into my eyes and smoothly dismantled every single assumption I had about their dynamic. She calmly stated that she knew exactly who I was from the very first moment Caleb introduced himself to her at the infrastructure fundraiser Tessa had witnessed. Adrian leaned back against the plush velvet seat and methodically outlined the exact, pathetic narrative Caleb had aggressively attempted to sell her. He had approached her playing the highly practiced role of the tragic, brilliant captive. He painted a vivid picture of a man hopelessly trapped in a marriage to a domineering, profoundly insecure woman who was secretly drowning in financial ruin due to massive corporate incompetence. He claimed I was desperately using his polished social presence and natural charisma as a reputation accessory to maintain a fragile facade of stability, while my career at Briarstone completely collapsed behind closed doors. He positioned himself as a visionary, frustrated consultant, whose immense potential was being systematically suffocated by a failing, desperate wife. Listening to a total stranger perfectly recite my husband's intricate, venomous lies was a surreal, out-of-body experience. But Adrienne was far too intelligent, and her instincts were far too sharp to be swayed by a pathetic, common sob story from a handsome man in a borrowed suit. She took a slow sip of her tea and calmly revealed the precise, chilling reason she had allowed Caleb to stay in her orbit for so long enough to seal his own fate. It wasn't his charm that had first caught her attention. It was his dangerous, blinding arrogance. During their subsequent private dinners, Caleb had grown increasingly overconfident. In his desperate, transparent attempt to prove his immense value to her and her massive private equity firm, he began heavily implying that his intimate proximity to me gave him unfettered, direct access to highly classified Briarstone operational data. He arrogantly boasted that he could accurately foresee major shifts in municipal infrastructure budgets, upcoming zoning overhauls, and predictive utility models long before they were ever released to the general public or the open market. He was actively, recklessly dangling my company's proprietary secrets as a shiny lure, silently promising her that his stolen insider knowledge could generate massive, guaranteed returns for her investment portfolios if his insights were utilized in the right place. The terrifying reality of the situation locked into place with the heavy thud of a vault door closing. Caleb was not just a cheating, opportunistic husband trying to upgrade his lifestyle and steal half my savings. He was actively attempting to leverage my strict professional integrity, recklessly risking my entire career and my potential legal freedom, to buy his way into a billionaire's good graces. He was happily offering up my life's work as a counterfeit dowry. Adrienne placed her delicate porcelain cup back onto the matching saucer with a soft, definitive click. The atmosphere between us instantly shifted from a cautious meeting of two strangers into a terrifying, unspoken alignment of interests. She did not lean across the small table to hold my hand in solidarity. She did not promise to become my fierce protector or to help me exact a fiery, emotional vengeance against the man who had wronged us both. She simply looked at me with an expression of profound, icy disdain for the man we were currently discussing. I entirely despise men who view wealthy women as a convenient golden parachute for their own profound mediocrity, she said, her voice dropping into a low, incredibly dangerous register. He actually believes he is playing a brilliant, high-stakes game of chess, completely unaware that he is not even a legitimate player on the board. If you want the absolute, undeniable truth on the legal record, I can easily make him say every single word of it himself. I sat perfectly still in Naomi Pike's office 2 days later, carefully reviewing the parameters of our newly formed, highly unorthodox alliance. Adrienne had laid out her terms with absolute clarity during our quiet tea, and Naomi immediately translated those terms into an impenetrable, flawless legal strategy. We all agreed on one absolute, unbreakable rule moving forward. We would not manufacture a single piece of evidence. We would not fabricate emotional distress to sway a sympathetic judge. Nor would we cross any ethical or legal boundaries that could compromise my professional standing. We did not need to build an elaborate, complex trap. We simply needed to leave the door wide open, turn on a blindingly bright light in the center of the room, and patiently let Caleb confidently walk right in. Over the next 3 weeks, Adrienne played her part with the terrifying, elegant precision of a seasoned apex predator toying with a remarkably arrogant prey. She maintained exactly enough professional distance to keep him desperately chasing her approval. She never offered him a firm commitment, but she consistently fed him enough breadcrumbs to make him genuinely believe he was finally touching the precipice of a much larger, grander future. She casually mentioned upcoming high-yield investment events taking place in London and Dubai. She extended vague, highly exclusive invitations to carefully curated private dinners in Manhattan, always ensuring he felt he was being uniquely selected from a vast pool of eager, wealthy suitors. Caleb, entirely blinded by his own towering narcissism and desperate greed, mistook her cold, clinical observation for genuine romantic passion and professional endorsement. Because he felt so close to the finish line, Caleb grew increasingly, recklessly bold. Naomi was quietly receiving secure, forwarded copies of every single digital interaction he initiated with Adrienne. Reading his text messages printed on crisp white legal paper was like watching a man eagerly and happily build his own gallows. He constantly bragged about his supposed deep, intimate understanding of the massive municipal data models I managed. In one particularly damning, lengthy exchange, he explicitly claimed he understood the intricate, highly confidential operational structure of Briarstone's civic systems entirely through late-night pillow talk. He was aggressively positioning himself as a highly lucrative, invisible bridge connecting the massive capital of her private equity fund with the tightly guarded urban data I controlled. He was selling a product he did not own, completely unaware that the buyer was handing the receipts directly to the original manufacturer. His audacity reached an entirely new, deeply absurd level late one Thursday night. He sent Adrienne a highly confidential voice note from his luxury rented apartment. Naomi played the audio file for me over her secure office speakers. Caleb had adopted a somber, deeply concerned, almost mournful tone. He stated that I was completely losing control of my professional faculties. He claimed my mental state was rapidly deteriorating under the immense, crushing pressure of the corporate audit. He told her it was the strategically wise time for him to permanently detach himself from our marriage before my plummeting reputation and supposedly frozen financial assets dragged his own pristine career down into the mud. He was actively, gleefully destroying my character to artificially elevate his own perceived value in her eyes. While Caleb was busy playing the role of a high-stakes corporate insider in the city, his aggressive new attorney officially filed his financial demands with the court. Naomi slid the thick, cream-colored legal document across her heavy mahogany desk with a tight, highly amused smile playing on her lips. Caleb was not just asking for a standard 50% split of our marital assets. He was demanding a significantly larger, wildly disproportionate share of everything we owned. His legal reasoning was built on the completely fabricated narrative that he had willingly sacrificed his own lucrative commercial real estate career to stay home, manage the household, and support my demanding corporate climb. He actually listed his attendance at my corporate galas as unpaid consulting labor. He wanted indefinite spousal support to maintain the affluent lifestyle he boldly claimed I had promised him. It was a staggering, breathtaking work of legal fiction, especially considering Naomi already possessed a decade of tax returns, proving my income was the sole financial engine keeping our entire life afloat. Against every natural human instinct to scream and defend myself, I maintained an absolute, suffocating silence. I did not issue a single correction to my confused friends. I did not send frantic, defensive emails to our mutual acquaintances to clear my name. I let the toxic, swirling rumors spread exactly as Caleb desperately wanted them to. I knew the fundamental rule of physics applied just as strictly to social destruction. The higher the pedestal he built upon a fragile foundation of lies, the more devastating and permanent the impact would be when the support structure was violently kicked out from underneath him. The sheer effectiveness of his smear campaign became glaringly obvious when my personal phone started buzzing with messages from his parents. They did not call to ask how I was coping with the sudden abandonment. They sent long, carefully worded text messages filled with probing questions masquerading as genuine pity. His mother sent a lengthy paragraph offering a heavily sanitized, polite apology for the abruptness of the situation. However, she swiftly followed it up by dropping heavy, deeply insulting hints. She wrote that sometimes men simply need a stable, peaceful environment to truly thrive, heavily implying my stressful career and supposed emotional instability had driven her brilliant son away. She suggested I take some time off to focus on my mental health. I read her messages while sitting alone in my quiet, dark kitchen, realizing with crystal clarity that his entire family had eagerly swallowed his fabricated story without a single moment of hesitation. They were entirely ready to cast me as the unstable, failing villain in order to protect the golden image of their son. I forwarded the insulting messages to Naomi without adding a single word of commentary. We had exactly what we needed to close the net. Adrienne confirmed her absolute willingness to execute the final maneuver. She agreed to physically appear at the official divorce signing meeting scheduled for the following week, but she laid down one absolute, non-negotiable condition. Every single revelation, every single piece of damning evidence, and every single broken lie had to be deployed in a brightly lit room filled with legally binding witnesses. There would be no private, tearful conversations in the hallway. There would be no opportunity for Caleb to twist the narrative, play the victim, or spin a new web of lies after the fact. Everything had to be placed firmly, irrevocably, on the official legal record. The psychological tension reached its absolute peak the night before the scheduled mediation. I was standing by the large bay window in my quiet, empty living room, watching the dark trees sway heavily in the cold winter wind. My phone screen suddenly illuminated the dark room. It was a text message from Caleb. He did not ask how I was doing. He spoke with the supreme, nauseating confidence of a man entirely convinced he held every single winning card in the deck. His message was brief, intensely condescending, and dripping with entirely unearned pity. "You should sign the papers quickly tomorrow morning," he wrote. "Dragging this out will only make things incredibly awkward and significantly more painful for you in the long run." I read his arrogant words twice, letting the sheer delusion of his statement wash over me. I did not type a furious, defensive reply. I did not throw my phone across the room in a fit of rage. I simply locked the screen, placed the device gently on the cold windowsill, and smiled. The mediation was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning on a freezing Tuesday. The venue was a high-elevation conference room located on the 42nd floor of a prestigious corporate law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The physical space was a masterclass in psychological intimidation. It was entirely encased in floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass, offering a dizzying, vertigo-inducing view of the gray city sprawling below. The massive table occupying the center of the room was carved from a single slab of dark, unyielding oak. The illumination came from recessed, blindingly white fluorescent lights that cast sharp, unforgiving shadows across every face. The atmosphere was incredibly sterile and clinical. It was the absolute, polar opposite of the warm, flickering candlelight and soft velvet drapery that had surrounded us during our disastrous anniversary dinner just weeks prior. This room was not designed for emotional closure. It was designed for the cold, calculated dissection of assets. I arrived 20 minutes early alongside Naomi Pike. I deliberately dressed for a corporate execution rather than a tragic emotional surrender. I wore a sharply tailored, simple charcoal suit, devoid of any silk accents or softening patterns. I wore absolutely zero jewelry, not even a simple watch or a pair of small earrings. My face was a completely blank canvas. I did not project the frail, devastating sorrow of a scorned, heartbroken wife. Conversely, I did not project the arrogant, smug triumph of a woman secretly holding the winning hand. I embodied total, impenetrable neutrality. I sat perfectly still in my heavy leather chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, breathing in slow, measured rhythms. Naomi sat quietly to my right, organizing her pristine, unmarked manila folders with the lethal calm of an assassin preparing her instruments. Caleb made his highly orchestrated entrance exactly 7 minutes past the scheduled hour. He did not walk in late out of logistical incompetence or a delay in city traffic. He walked in late because making 2 entire families and a team of expensive lawyers wait for him was a deliberate, petty assertion of his perceived dominance. He pushed through the heavy glass doors looking absolutely radiant. He wore a brand new, flawlessly tailored navy blue suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. A heavy, aggressively shiny silver timepiece gleamed on his left wrist every time he moved his arm. His posture was impeccably straight, his chin tilted slightly upward. He carried the beaming, insufferable aura of a man who firmly believed every single mathematical equation in the universe had just perfectly aligned in his ultimate favor. He did not step into the freezing room alone. Walking gracefully just 1/2 step behind his right shoulder was Adrienne Vale. She was draped in a breathtakingly elegant beige cashmere coat, her dark hair pulled back severely, her expression entirely unreadable. She moved with the quiet, terrifying grace of royalty inspecting a foreign province. Her sudden physical manifestation in this deeply personal legal setting sent an immediate, violent shockwave through the relatives seated in the designated gallery chairs along the back wall. My father instantly hardened his jaw, refusing to even look in her direction. Caleb's mother audibly gasped, a tiny sound of mingled terror and profound awe escaping her throat as she desperately tried, and completely failed, to make eye contact with the billionaire widow. Adrienne did not offer a single greeting. She did not nod. She simply glided to a vacant leather armchair situated in the far corner of the room, sat down, and crossed her legs with immaculate poise. She became a silent, monumental statue of pure intimidation. Caleb, completely misreading the heavy, suffocating tension in the room as stunned admiration for his new upgrade, leaned fully into his role as the magnanimous victor. He walked slowly around the perimeter of the massive oak table, acting utterly mature and worldly. He confidently extended his hand to his father, who shook it vigorously with a puffed-out chest. He even had the sheer, staggering audacity to step toward my side of the table and offer a polite, solemn nod to my mother, acting exactly like a highly civilized man, gracefully managing a difficult but deeply necessary corporate transition. When my mother entirely ignored him, staring straight ahead with eyes like chips of flint, Caleb merely offered a tight, patronizing smile. He then took his designated seat directly across from me, smoothing his silk tie, fully prepared to close the history of our marriage with a stroke of a pen. The opposing counsel, a sharp-looking man with a severe haircut, formally slid the thick, cream-colored stack of settlement documents across the polished wood. The papers stopped exactly 1 inch from Caleb's hands. However, Caleb did not reach for his silver pen right away. He raised his right hand, his palm facing outward in a gentle, commanding gesture, requesting a moment of silence from the room. He could not resist the overwhelming urge to turn this sterile legal proceeding into his own personal press conference. He cleared his throat softly and launched into a meticulously rehearsed monologue regarding his fundamental, undeniable right to protect his own future trajectory. He spoke to the captive audience using the exact tone a benevolent savior might use when explaining why he unfortunately had to leave the sick behind to save the village. He subtly, but unmistakably, referenced the current volatility surrounding my career. He stated, his voice dripping with highly manufactured, theatrical sorrow, that a man can only carry the heavy burden of another person's instability for so long before his own spine begins to break. He claimed he desperately wanted to build a legacy, to establish a truly secure, unshakable foundation for the decades to come. He looked directly into my completely blank eyes and announced that he absolutely refused to let his own bright, boundless potential drowned simply because he had accidentally shackled himself to a vessel that had lost its navigational compass and was rapidly taking on water. Then, he executed the grand finale of his grotesque performance. He turned his torso slightly, extending an open, sweeping hand toward the shadowy corner where Adrian sat in absolute chilling silence. His entire face lit up with a toxic, unconcealed pride. He formally introduced her to the silent room not merely as his new partner, but as a profound revelation. He proudly declared her to be a woman who genuinely understood the monumental scale of his ambition. He praised her as an individual who inherently knew the exact value of relentless drive, someone who flawlessly comprehended what it actually took to construct and maintain an elite, high-class existence. He was essentially telling my family, and his own, that he had successfully traded up, leaving the slums of our shared struggle for the golden gates of high society. The conference room fell completely, utterly dead. The silence was so profound it felt like the air pressure in the room had drastically dropped, making it difficult to draw a full breath. Caleb turned his attention back to the heavy oak table. He smoothly reached inside the inner breast pocket of his tailored navy jacket and withdrew his expensive fountain pen. He uncapped it with a soft, metallic click that echoed loudly against the glass walls. He looked down at the signature line resting at the bottom of the final page. A slow, deeply satisfied, entirely triumphant smile spread wide across his face. He sat there, pen hovering just a fraction of an inch above the thick paper, genuinely believing that before the morning hours concluded, he would successfully legally sever himself from a deteriorating, worthless liability and officially step through the glowing doorway of unimaginable, endless wealth. The silver tip of his expensive fountain pen was a mere fraction of an inch from the thick white paper. Before the dark blue ink could even touch the signature line, a slender manicured hand reached out across the polished oak table and pressed firmly down on the center of the legal dossier. It was Adrienne. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a sudden, theatrical movement that would indicate panic. She simply shifted her weight forward and spoke with a quiet, commanding authority that instantly shattered the sterile silence of the conference room. "Hold on a moment," she instructed smoothly. "There are a few specific items that must be officially recorded before this document holds any legal value whatsoever." The entire room jolted to a sudden, violent halt. Caleb paused, his arm frozen in midair. A tight, highly artificial smile crept onto his handsome face. He chuckled nervously, clearly assuming Adrian was stepping in at the last possible second to insert a strict confidentiality clause or to publicly insulate her own pristine reputation from the messy public fallout of his divorce proceedings. He turned his head toward her, his eyes silently pleading for her to remain the supportive, golden trophy he had promised his family she was. But Adrian did not return his gaze. She completely ignored his existence. Instead, her piercing, analytical eyes locked directly onto my attorney, Naomi Pike. "I am not sitting in this room today in the capacity of a romantic partner," Adrienne announced, her voice echoing coldly against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. "I have absolutely no intention of building any sort of future with this man. I am here strictly as a material witness. I am fully prepared to testify and formally confirm a highly calculated, sustained series of malicious actions executed by Caleb Whitmore over the past several weeks." Caleb physically recoiled, as if he had been violently struck across the jaw. He dropped his silver pen, the heavy metal clattering loudly against the wooden table. Before his aggressive defense attorney could even formulate a coherent objection, Adrienne reached into her designer leather tote bag and withdrew a thick, neatly bound stack of printed documents. She slid them directly across the table to Naomi. The stack contained hundreds of pages of perfectly formatted text messages, detailed calendar invites, and digital transcripts. Adrienne concisely explained to the stunned room that Caleb had willingly and eagerly provided all of this material to her. In these extensive exchanges, he explicitly referred to me as a rapidly depreciating corporate asset. Even more dangerously, he repeatedly and heavily implied that he could safely secure highly confidential, proprietary urban planning data from my company to illegally benefit her private equity investments. Naomi did not waste a single second allowing the opposing counsel to process the ambush. She tapped the screen of her tablet, instantly pairing it with the high-fidelity speaker sitting in the center of the table. She stated that she was entering Exhibit A into the official record. A harsh digital click filled the room, followed immediately by the unmistakable, arrogant sound of Caleb laughing. His recorded voice flooded the freezing conference room, sounding relaxed, intensely boastful, and entirely devoid of basic human empathy. "The thing about highly successful women," the recorded, Caleb chuckled through the speaker, "is that they usually do not notice what a man quietly takes out of the house, just as long as they are frantically busy trying to save their own careers." The air in the room completely crystallized. My father gripped the edge of his chair so fiercely the heavy oak groaned under the immense pressure of his hands. Caleb drained of all color. His face turned a sickly, pale shade of ash. He desperately scrambled out of his leather chair, holding his hands up in a frantic, defensive posture. He began stammering wildly, sweating profusely inside his expensive tailored suit, loudly insisting that the audio recording was taken entirely out of context. He begged the room to believe that his words were being maliciously twisted and deliberately misunderstood by two vengeful women. Adrian stopped his pathetic display of panic with a single, terrifyingly calm sentence. "Do not insult my intelligence by claiming you were misunderstood." She cut in, her tone sharp enough to draw actual blood. "I never once attempted to seduce you. I never offered you a position at my firm. I merely gave you the space to keep talking whenever you foolishly thought you were impressing me. In the end, your own arrogance did all the damage for me." She was not finished dismantling his entire constructed reality. She turned slightly in her chair to address the horrified gallery of family members sitting paralyzed against the back wall. She systematically laid out exactly how Caleb had repeatedly described his 6-year marriage to me. He did not describe it as a tragic failure of love. He had explicitly called our union the final bridge he needed to cross before permanently transitioning into a much wealthier, elite existence. She provided undeniable, printed proof that his departure had absolutely nothing to do with a lack of emotional connection, a desperate desire for peace, or my supposed professional instability. His dramatic exit was nothing more than a cold, premeditated financial and social calculation. He was attempting a hostile corporate takeover of his own life, using my resources to fund the buyout. The absolute devastation sweeping through the gallery behind me was palpable. Caleb's father sat completely paralyzed, his mouth hanging slightly open, utterly unable to form a single word of defense for the brilliant son he had proudly championed just 10 minutes prior. His mother finally broke down completely, burying her face in her trembling hands, her quiet, muffled sobs echoing tragically in the tense, sterile space. The extended relatives who had readily believed his lies, the very same aunts and uncles who had sent me condescending text messages suggesting I seek mental help, now stared at Caleb with a mixture of sheer disgust and profound horror. They were looking at him as if his human mask had completely melted away, revealing a cold, calculating stranger standing right in the middle of the ashes of his own burned-down life. Caleb stood frozen at the edge of the massive table, a completely broken, publicly humiliated man. He was utterly stripped of his false charm and his stolen prestige. He looked wildly around the room, frantically searching for a single sympathetic face, but found only impenetrable walls of ice. I remained perfectly still in my chair, my expression completely unchanged, silently watching the flawless execution of the trap we had carefully built simply by letting him be himself. Just as the crushing, suffocating weight of his public moral destruction fully settled over his shoulders, Naomi Pike smoothly closed the first manila folder. The quiet rustle of the heavy paper sounded exactly like a concluding gavel strike. She reached for a second, significantly thicker file resting on her desk. She looked directly into Caleb's panicked, trembling eyes. "The evidence Ms. Vale has generously provided only covers the ethical and moral violations of your behavior. Naomi stated with a terrifying, absolute calmness that chilled the room further. The second part of this meeting concerns the financial reality, and I assure you, the financial part is significantly worse. Naomi Pike did not pause to let the heavy, suffocating atmosphere in the conference room settle. She operated with the ruthless efficiency of a surgeon who had already made the first incision and was now fully prepared to extract the rot. She opened the second, significantly thicker manila folder resting on the polished oak table. The sharp rustle of the heavy legal paper sounded like a crack of thunder in the utterly silent room. Naomi extracted a meticulously organized stack of bank statements and wire transfer receipts. She slid them across the vast expanse of the dark wood, stopping them precisely in front of Caleb and his visibly pale attorney. She began reciting the undeniable financial data. Over the course of the previous 8 months, Caleb had not merely skimmed small amounts of cash for his Manhattan excursions. He had systematically executed a series of fraudulent wire transfers from our primary joint savings account directly into the corporate accounts of his newly formed limited liability company. He had disguised every single one of these substantial withdrawals under the completely fabricated ledger category of independent consulting fees. He was actively invoicing his own household, quietly draining our shared liquid assets, while simultaneously preparing a legal petition demanding half of my remaining net worth due to his supposedly unstable financial future. The financial betrayal, however, extended far beyond simple embezzlement. Naomi pulled out a secondary stack of documents printed on rigid, bright white paper. It was a comprehensive commercial credit application submitted to a major national bank just 3 weeks prior. Naomi explained, her voice entirely devoid of any emotion, that Caleb had illegally accessed my private, locked filing cabinet at our home. He had scanned my highly confidential federal tax returns from the previous 3 fiscal years, along with my most recent executive compensation summaries from Briarstone Civic Systems. He had attached my stellar financial history to his own fraudulent corporate application in a desperate attempt to secure a massive commercial line of credit. He was actively trying to leverage my unblemished credit rating to build a massive, hidden financial reservoir for his new bachelor life before the divorce petition was even officially filed with the family court. Caleb began to physically unravel right in front of our eyes, the polished, arrogant facade he had worn into the room completely shattered, leaving behind a frantic, cornered man. He leaned heavily against the wooden table, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. He desperately stammered that he was merely preparing a safety net. He looked wildly toward his own parents, his voice cracking as he loudly claimed he was terrified of the impending corporate audit at my company. He swore he was only trying to ensure he would not end up completely destitute if my entire career went up in flames. Naomi did not raise her voice, but her words sliced through his pathetic excuses with surgical precision. She stated clearly that his clandestine actions did not represent a panicked safety net. In the strict eyes of the law, his actions constituted a deliberate, premeditated concealment of marital assets during the pre-litigation phase. By secretly transferring funds and attempting to secure unauthorized credit lines using stolen financial documents, he had entirely obliterated his own legal standing. His exorbitant demands for equitable distribution and spousal support were now completely void. He had transformed a standard civil divorce proceeding into a scenario bordering on serious financial fraud. The room fell into a deathly, paralyzing quiet. His attorney stared down at the damning paperwork, completely unable to mount a single verbal defense. It was in that heavy, frozen silence that I finally chose to speak for the first time that morning. I did not scream. I did not allow a single tear to form in my eyes. I looked directly at the man I had shared a home with for 6 long years. I told Caleb that the ultimate tragedy of our marriage was not that his eyes had wandered to another woman. It was not the public humiliation at the anniversary dinner, or the cowardly text messages he sent in the dark. I explained, in a voice as calm and cold as a winter morning, that he had fundamentally misunderstood the very concept of human loyalty. He did not view marriage as a partnership forged in trust. He viewed me purely as a blue-chip stock in his personal financial portfolio. When he falsely perceived that my market value was dropping due to the corporate audit, he did not stand by my side to weather the market volatility. He immediately moved to aggressively short the stock. He treated my loyalty as a bad investment that needed to be ruthlessly cut loose to maximize his own selfish profit margins. As my words settled heavily over the table, Adrienne Vale delivered the absolute, final strike. She remained perfectly still in her leather chair in the corner of the room, her posture immaculate. She informed the room that her massive private equity fund had, purely by coincidence, been actively evaluating a highly lucrative secondary infrastructure project spearheaded by a subsidiary of Briarstone Civic Systems. Adrienne revealed that when Caleb began arrogantly boasting about his supposed access to my confidential municipal data, he triggered an immediate, severe corporate alarm within her organization. She did not find his insider knowledge impressive. She found it to be a massive, catastrophic legal liability. She explained that she had immediately forwarded every single one of his voice notes and text messages directly to her elite team of corporate lawyers and compliance officers. She mandated them to build an impenetrable legal firewall to formally protect Briarstone, and by extension, me, from the severe danger of a municipal investigation or a massive data leak scandal. The sheer gravity of Adrienne's revelation completely crushed whatever fight was left inside Caleb. He was not merely a terrible, selfish husband attempting to steal my savings. In his desperate, clumsy attempt to play the role of a high-rolling corporate insider, he had recklessly endangered the most massive municipal data contract in the state. He had come terrifyingly close to triggering a federal investigation that could have entirely destroyed my professional reputation, stripped me of my executive title, and potentially ended with me facing severe legal consequences. He was perfectly willing to burn my entire life to the ground just so he could use the light of the flames to impress a wealthy stranger. Caleb slowly turned his head to look at me. His pristine navy suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too large for his shrinking frame. His shoulders were completely slumped, his face heavily lined with sheer exhaustion and genuine, unadulterated terror. He dropped his voice into a low, pathetic whisper, entirely ignoring the presence of the lawyers and our stunned families. He pleaded with us to stop the onslaught. He admitted that he was completely out of his depth. He confessed that he was simply paralyzed by the fear of losing the affluent lifestyle we had built. And in his blind panic, he claimed he did not truly understand the severe consequences of the moves he was making. He was begging for mercy from the very woman he had confidently tried to destroy just 1 hour prior. I did not offer him a single word of forgiveness. I did not nod in understanding or offer a comforting, sympathetic smile. I simply reached out with my right hand and placed my fingertips on the edge of the thick, cream-colored settlement agreement his aggressive attorney had so proudly presented at the beginning of the meeting. The document that outlined his massive financial demands and his arrogant claims for spousal support. I slowly, deliberately pushed the heavy stack of paper across the dark oak table, sliding it directly back toward Naomi Pike. That single, silent physical gesture clearly communicated to every single person in the room that the original terms of surrender Caleb believed he controlled were now completely unequivocally dead. He had lost absolutely everything. The heavy silence in the room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The hum of the city traffic 42 floors below seemed to completely vanish. Caleb stared blankly at the rejected settlement documents resting near Naomi's hands. He slowly raised his defeated eyes to meet my unwavering gaze. He looked like a man standing at the absolute edge of a dark, bottomless cliff, finally realizing there was no safety net waiting to catch him. "Then what do you want?" Caleb asked, his voice shaking violently, completely stripped of its former arrogant resonance. I looked at the broken man sitting across from me, the man who had tried to sell my future to buy his own. And for the very first time since this entire nightmare began, I smiled. I did not answer his desperate, trembling question with a long, highly emotional speech. I did not shed a single tear of vindication, nor did I raise my voice to match the frantic, chaotic energy he was suddenly projecting across the freezing conference room. Instead, I simply reached my hand across the smooth, dark oak table and pulled a completely different, significantly thinner manila folder directly toward my chest. Naomi Pike had meticulously prepared this specific legal document late the previous night. I placed my hands flat and steady against the cool paper cover. I wanted every single person in that room to clearly and unmistakably understand that I had never walked into this mediation to beg for my shattered marriage to be resurrected. I did not travel to Manhattan this morning to negotiate a peaceful truce or to desperately salvage the ruined foundation of our shared life. I came here strictly to execute a highly precise, entirely factual conclusion to the absolute farce my husband had arrogantly created. Naomi opened the new folder with a sharp, decisive movement that echoed loudly in the stunned silence. She looked directly at Caleb and his completely paralyzed, utterly defeated attorney. She formally declared to the entire room that the original parameters of the divorce settlement were now entirely null and void. She explained, with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned executioner, that because Caleb had actively engaged in the deliberate, premeditated concealment of marital assets, the entire legal landscape had shifted. Because he had recklessly generated immense financial risk for my corporate standing by stealing my private tax documents, and because we now possessed irrefutable, recorded proof that he fully intended to exploit confidential marital information for personal, illicit profit, the settlement terms were undergoing a radical, non-negotiable transformation. The new terms were designed to be completely and entirely unfavorable to him. The remaining color completely drained from Caleb's handsome face as Naomi clearly outlined his grim new reality. He was absolutely not going to receive his coveted 50% split of our estate. He was certainly not going to receive a single dime of the exorbitant, ridiculous spousal support he had boldly demanded to fund his lavish new bachelor lifestyle. In fact, Naomi calmly explained that the court would highly likely mandate him to fully reimburse every single dollar he had fraudulently wired to his hidden shell company over the past 4 months. Furthermore, if he decided to foolishly contest this new, brutally restrictive agreement in an open courtroom, the documented evidence of his attempted corporate espionage and his financial fraud would be immediately entered into the permanent public record. That action would effectively destroy any remote chance he had of ever securing employment in the commercial sector again. He was entirely trapped in a terrifying cage of his own making, and the lock had just clicked shut. But the severe financial devastation was merely the prelude to the final, absolute destruction of his carefully constructed narrative. I leaned forward slightly in my heavy leather chair, making sure my steady voice carried clearly to the back of the room where his stunned, horrified parents sat in silence. I informed him that the grueling internal audit at Briarstone Civic Systems was essentially concluded. I was never the target of the investigation, and I was certainly never in any actual danger of losing my executive position. The reality of my career was the exact opposite of the tragic, failing picture he had so eagerly painted for his wealthy new friends. I explained that the corporate board of directors had been so incredibly impressed with my steady, unwavering crisis management over the past 2 months that they had formally asked me to completely lead the newly formed strategic restructuring unit. I was not sinking into professional obscurity. I was being promoted to the absolute highest executive tier of the company, commanding a global division and a significantly larger compensation package. Before Caleb could even begin to process the staggering magnitude of his catastrophic miscalculation, Adrienne Vale delivered the final, fatal stroke of the morning. She gracefully adjusted the lapels of her pristine cashmere coat and casually confirmed to the silent room that Vale Ledger Capital was currently in the advanced stages of drafting a massive long-term operational partnership with Briarstone Civic Systems. The highly lucrative collaboration would officially launch the moment the internal legal reviews were fully cleared. She looked at Caleb with a gaze so intensely cold, it could freeze boiling water. She told him that he had not bravely abandoned a sinking ship to save himself. He had foolishly, blindly jumped off a skyrocketing vessel precisely as it was preparing for launch. He had voluntarily walked away from an empire he would never again have the necessary security clearance or the basic social standing to even walk near. He had engineered his own downfall. I picked up my own silver pen, the heavy metal feeling cool and perfectly balanced in my right hand. I flipped to the final page of Naomi's heavily revised, uncompromising divorce petition. I pressed the dark ink against the thick white paper and signed my name with strong, deliberate, and entirely unbroken strokes. I pushed the fully executed document back across the table. I looked directly into Caleb's entirely hollow, ruined eyes. The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. I told him he did not lose me because I fell or because I became a burden. I told him he lost me because the very first minute he thought the money could leave. He decided to leave first. In the gallery behind him, his mother finally broke down into genuine, ugly, uncontrollable sobs, burying her face completely in her hands. His father stared blankly at the dark wood floor, entirely unable to look at me, at Naomi, or at his own son, his stubborn pride completely shattered by the sheer magnitude of Caleb's pathetic, public failure. On my side of the room, I heard my father exhale a long, heavy breath, the crushing, silent tension of the past few weeks finally leaving his broad shoulders. My family could finally breathe again after weeks of being forced to doubt my stability in total silence. I stood up from my heavy leather chair, slowly buttoning the front of my charcoal jacket. As I turned my back on the table and began walking toward the glass doors, Caleb desperately tried to call my name. The sound of his voice was incredibly weak, completely stripped of its former golden confidence and arrogant charm. He did not sound like a conquering victor anymore. He sounded exactly like a man who had just fully realized he had traded a deeply secure, brilliant reality to chase a cheap, entirely vain illusion. He sounded completely broken. I did not stop walking. I did not turn my head to look back at the wreckage of his life. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the law firm and took the silent, rapid elevator down to the main lobby. When I finally stepped out onto the busy Manhattan pavement, the freezing winter wind whipped fiercely through my hair, but the cold air felt incredibly clean, sharp, and revitalizing. My phone vibrated softly inside my dark coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a brief, highly anticipated text message from Tessa back at the corporate office. She wrote that the board approved everything and that the new division was officially mine. I locked the screen and merged smoothly into the fast-moving, anonymous crowds of the city. I smiled brightly, because I finally understood that the most beautiful, satisfying endings do not occur when the traitor falls to his knees and begs for your forgiveness. The absolute best endings happen when you simply leave him completely behind, forever trapped in the pathetic, ruined story he arrogantly thought he was writing. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Daisy Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support me even further by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by as many people as possible.